Lyra staggered through the hot desert, her skin burning under the relentless sun. The sand around her seemed endless, a pale sea of dust and heat. She'd been walking for days with little food, no water, and only a single hope keeping her moving: the oasis. She had heard rumors about it. Some said it was a mirage, a trick of the sun. Others claimed it was a real place, hidden deep within the desolation. But no one who had gone looking for it had returned. Lyra didn't care about the warnings. She was desperate. She hadn't had a drop of water in 2 days, and her throat was so dry it felt like it might crack open at any moment. She kept going, her legs weak and shaky, her vision blurry from the heat. Every step felt like it could be her last. But still, she pressed forward. The faint shimmer in the distance might be the answer to her survival. It had to be. The heat from the sun was unbearable, but Lyra refused to stop. She needed water, needed it more than anything. Her mind kept drifting to the city she had left behind, the last place she had called home. The streets were empty now, filled with the ghostly echoes of what used to be. A few survivors remained, but most of them had long since succumbed to thirst. The water supply had dried up, and what little remained was rationed by the government, held tightly by those who had the power to control it. She had seen too many people beg for just a sip, and she had seen too many die, because they were not deemed worthy enough to receive it. Lyra didn't care about the politics of it anymore. She had heard enough of the stories, seen enough suffering. What mattered now was surviving, and the oasis was her only hope. It had to be real. If she found it, she could drink, maybe even find shelter. And if it wasn't, then she would die trying. She wiped the sweat from her brow, feeling the sticky film of salt on her skin. Her lips cracked as she licked them, desperate for even a hint of moisture. Her body was on the brink of collapse, but she kept moving. Suddenly, the shimmer in the distance grew stronger, more defined. It was a blur of green against the pale sand. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't imagining it. It was real. The oasis was real. With a burst of energy, she pushed herself forward, her legs moving faster, her breath coming in quick, ragged gasps. As she neared the oasis, the heat seemed to lift, replaced by the cool air of the water's edge. It was almost too good to be true. But as she approached, her eyes caught something strange. The oasis wasn't just a natural spring, as she had expected. It was a camp, a small, carefully constructed settlement. It was unlike anything she had seen in the wastelands. The buildings were sleek and shiny, made of materials she didn't recognize. A strange, low hum filled the air, and the people around her moved with purpose, their clothes strange and futuristic. Lyra froze, unsure of what to do. She had no idea who these people were or what they wanted, but the sight of water, real water, was too tempting. She didn't care who they were. She needed it. A figure approached her, a man tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially obscured by a hood. His eyes were dark, but there was something about them that made her feel both nervous and safe at the same time. His presence was commanding, as if he belonged to a world far beyond this desert. "Are you lost?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. Lyra swallowed hard, struggling to speak. Her throat felt like sandpaper. "Water," she managed to croak. "Please, I need water." The man studied her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. There was something in his gaze that made Lyra's heart race. It was as if he was measuring her, deciding whether or not she was worth the effort. After a moment, he nodded. "Follow me," he said. Lyra followed the man through the camp, her eyes wide as she took in the strange technology around her. Everything looked so advanced, far beyond anything she had ever seen. She had lived her whole life in a crumbling world where technology had either failed or been abandoned. And now, here was something completely different. It was as if she had stepped into a different reality. They reached a small building at the center of the camp. The man gestured for her to sit on a low bench inside. As she sat, she could feel the cool air conditioning against her skin, the first real comfort she'd felt in days. He stood in front of her, studying her closely. "You're not the first to come here seeking water," he said, his voice still calm. "But water is not what you need." Lyra's heart sank. "What do you mean?" The man's eyes softened, and he leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can give you more than water. I can give you a chance to survive in this world, to live without it. But it comes with a cost." Lyra's mind raced. What was he offering? And what did he mean by a cost? She was ready to do anything for a drop of water. But what if what he was offering was something more than she could handle? Lyra's heart thudded in her chest. She had come so far, pushed her body to the edge. And now, in this strange place, she was hearing words she didn't understand. "More than water," she repeated, her voice weak but urgent. "What do you mean?" The man, still standing before her, seemed to study her closely. His eyes were intense, but there was a calmness in his expression that made her feel both uneasy and strangely comforted. He wasn't like anyone she had met before. The way he carried himself, the quiet power in his movements, it was like he was from a different world altogether. "You're not the first to come here," he said again, his voice low, almost gentle. "People have wandered into this camp, seeking water, seeking survival. But what you need isn't water. It's something more." Lyra blinked, her mouth dry. She was too tired to think straight. But one thing was clear in her mind. She needed something to drink. She needed it more than anything else in the world. But she didn't want to appear weak, didn't want to beg for it, even though she felt her body trembling with desperation. The man studied her for a few moments before he sighed, almost as if he had expected this reaction. "You're in no condition to make choices," he said, shaking his head. "But I will tell you this. I can offer you something far greater than the water you seek. I can offer you the chance to survive without it." Lyra's brows furrowed. Survive without water? His eyes glinted with an unreadable expression. "Yes. Imagine a world where you no longer need water to live. A world where your body can adapt, change, and thrive in even the harshest environments. It is not a gift I give lightly, but it is a gift I can offer." Her mind raced. She had heard of people who had experimented with technology, trying to unlock human potential, trying to change the body's limits. But this sounded different. Too different. She had seen what desperation could do to people, had watched as survivors turned on each other for the smallest drop of water. But to live without it, what's the catch? She asked, trying to steady her breathing. The man's expression softened. "You would have to trust me. Trust that this transformation is not just a way to survive, but a way to change everything. Your body will evolve. It will become something more. You will no longer be bound by the old rules of survival." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "But it comes with a price, just as everything does." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. A price. She had nothing left to give. She had no family, no belongings, no connections. She was alone in a world that didn't care about her existence. And yet here was a chance to not only survive but to live, to become something beyond human limits. Her body ached, but the idea of becoming something more than she was, something that didn't need water, filled her with an unexpected sense of hope. I don't understand," she said slowly, trying to gather her thoughts. "How can you give me that?" The man seemed to read her confusion. He stepped back slightly and raised a hand, signaling her to stay seated. "It is not something I can explain fully, not yet. But I will show you. I have helped others, and I can help you too. But you must understand that the transformation is not just physical. It will change you in ways you cannot imagine." Lyra swallowed hard, her thoughts swirling. She had been ready to die, had been prepared to accept her fate. But now, the thought of living, of truly living, was too strong to ignore. What kind of life would she have if she could no longer depend on water? What would she be capable of if she could survive without it? The man's voice brought her back to reality. "I know it's hard to believe, but think about it, Lyra. Water is a finite resource. It will run out. The Earth will continue to decay unless humanity evolves, adapts. You can be part of that change, but only if you are willing to take the first step. His words hung in the air like a challenge, and Lyra could feel the weight of them. He wasn't just talking about survival. He was talking about a new future, a future where humanity didn't have to struggle for the basics of life. She could be a part of that future. She could help shape it. She could lead others to safety, to a new beginning. But she also knew there was a risk. What if the transformation didn't work? What if she lost everything that made her? The fear of the unknown crept in, but it was swallowed by the growing fire of hope. "I'll do it," she said, the words leaving her lips before she could think better of them. The man nodded, his eyes deep with approval. "Good. You won't regret it." He turned and motioned for her to follow. Lyra stood up, her legs still shaky, but the sense of purpose within her was undeniable. The camp felt different now, more like a place where something monumental was about to happen. As she followed the man, she realized that this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about evolution. It was about shaping the future of humanity, one decision at a time. And Lyra had just made hers. Lyra followed the man through the camp, her thoughts racing. She couldn't quite grasp what he had told her. It was too much to take in. Living without water. How was that even possible? Her body had been screaming for water since she'd first set foot in the desert. She had felt her strength draining, her skin drying and cracked. Yet here was this stranger offering her something beyond anything she could imagine. They reached a small, clean building at the heart of the camp. The inside was cool, a stark contrast to the burning heat outside. Lyra sat on a simple bench while the man, who she still didn't know the name of, prepared something in a glass vial. The soft hum of the technology around them seemed to calm her nerves, though her mind was far from at ease. "I can't promise you that this will be easy," the man said as he handed her the vial. It was filled with a clear liquid, glowing faintly in the dim light of the room. "What I offer will change you, change everything you know. But if you accept, your body will no longer need water. You'll be free of the endless search for survival." Lyra stared at the vial. It was beautiful in its simplicity, but there was something about it that made her hesitant. She had spent most of her life fighting for a drop of water, watching people die when there wasn't enough to go around. To give up that struggle, to let go of everything she knew, was she ready for that? "What if it doesn't work?" she asked, her voice quieter than she intended. The man's gaze softened. "It will work, but there's always a chance that your body will fight it. Not everyone is strong enough to survive the transformation. You could lose yourself in the process." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. The idea of losing herself, of becoming something unrecognizable, terrified her. But the thought of dying here, in this wasteland, was just as frightening. She could see her past, her life in the city, the people she had known, all of it slipping away, a fading memory in a dying world. Her options were limited, her time running out. She looked at the vial again, the cool liquid tempting her. Water had always been the ultimate need, the one thing that could keep her alive. But what the man was offering her wasn't just water. It was freedom. It was power. Power to survive beyond the need for water. Power to change. "Is there any other way?" she asked, still unsure, trying to find some reason to hold back, to not trust him. The man's expression remained calm, though there was something in his eyes, an intensity that made it clear he was not offering this lightly. "There are no other ways. You've seen it for yourself. The Earth is dying, and so are we, unless we evolve. Humanity's future doesn't lie in the past. It lies in change." Lyra felt a surge of fear mixed with hope. The man was right. The world she knew was gone. The cities, the farms, the streets, everything was collapsing under the weight of the water shortage. The few that survived did so by taking from others, fighting for scraps. Nothing was certain anymore. Except one thing: if she stayed the way she was, if she kept relying on the old ways, she wouldn't make it. No one would. I don't know what will happen if I do this, she whispered, her fingers curling around the vial. But if I don't try, I won't survive, will I? The man didn't answer right away. He simply looked at her, letting the silence stretch out. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. No, you won't. And neither will the rest of humanity, if we don't evolve. This is the only way forward. Lyra stood up, her hands trembling. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about the future of humanity. She could either cling to the past, the world that was already dying, or she could step into the unknown, embrace the change, and become something more. Something better. Slowly, she uncorked the vial, the soft pop of the seal echoing in the quiet room. Without thinking any longer, she tilted it to her lips and drank. The liquid was cold and smooth, slipping down her throat with an almost unnatural ease. As it settled inside her, she felt a sudden rush of heat, a wave that swept over her body from the inside out. It was as though her blood was being replaced with something else, something foreign. She gasped, her hands pressing against the sides of her head as her vision blurred. Pain. It was sharp, sudden, overwhelming. Every inch of her body seemed to ache, as if her cells were being torn apart and put back together. She stumbled back, almost falling, but the man caught her before she could hit the ground. "You'll be fine," he said, though there was an edge of concern in his voice. "This is just the beginning. Let it happen." Lyra's body shook, her skin burning as if she was being reborn. She closed her eyes, focusing on the pain, forcing herself to breathe through it. The world seemed to spin around her. And then, just as suddenly, the pain stopped. A deep silence settled over her, and when she opened her eyes again, she felt different. The man was watching her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "It's done," he said. "You are no longer the person you were. You have become something more." Lyra stood there, breathless, her heart racing. She didn't know what had just happened, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life had just changed forever. Lyra took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The room felt different now. Her body was different. It was as if every part of her had been rewired, reshaped. The pain had faded, but in its place was something she couldn't quite explain. She didn't feel like herself, but she didn't feel weak either. She felt stronger, more aware. The man stood in front of her, watching her with an expression that was both curious and approving. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. Lyra hesitated, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached for the edge of the table to steady herself. I don't know," she said, her voice shaky. "I feel different. It's like I can feel everything." "Good," the man said, nodding. "That's the first step. The transformation is more than just a physical change. It's about perception, too. You'll see things differently, understand the world in ways you never could before." Lyra looked down at her hands, her skin tingling as she flexed her fingers. The change wasn't just in her mind. It was in her body, too. Her muscles felt tighter, more powerful. Her senses were heightened, sharper. She could feel the air in the room, the faint hum of energy running through the walls, the quiet rush of her blood. It was all so vivid, so real. How does it work?" she asked, her voice still uncertain. "How can I survive without water?" The man smiled faintly, as though this was a question he had answered many times before. "It's not about not needing water. It's about what you've become. Your body can now draw energy from the environment, from the air, from the energy around you. You won't need water in the same way you once did. The transformation allows your cells to adapt, to thrive without the constant need for hydration. But there's more. You'll be able to survive in environments that would have killed you before." Lyra's mind was still spinning, trying to process everything he had said. She had come here seeking water, but now she was being told she didn't need it anymore. Her body, her very being, had changed in ways she didn't fully understand. It was a lot to take in all at once. "So, I can just keep going, keep living?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded. "Yes, but remember, this comes with a responsibility. You are part of something bigger now. You have the ability to adapt, but you also have the potential to help others do the same. The world is changing, and the humans who survive will need to evolve, just like you have." Lyra nodded slowly, her mind racing. She had wanted to survive, to find a way to keep going in this world that was falling apart. But she had never imagined anything like this. She had always thought of survival as finding a source of water. But now, it seemed there was something more to it, something she had never considered. The man stepped back, his expression thoughtful. "You'll need time to adjust to your new abilities. They won't make themselves known all at once. But I can guide you, help you learn what you are now capable of." Lyra didn't answer right away. Instead, she closed her eyes and focused on the strange feeling coursing through her body. It was like a current of energy, pulsing through her veins, filling her with strength and awareness. She could feel the vibrations of the air, hear the soft whispers of energy around her. It was as if she had unlocked something deep inside herself, a hidden power she hadn't known existed. After a moment, she opened her eyes again and looked at the man. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice steady now, more sure of herself than before. The man smiled slightly, as though he had been waiting for this question. "Now we see what you can do. We test your limits. We show you the path forward." Lyra nodded, her mind made up. She had come here desperate, needing something, anything that could keep her alive. But now she was different. She had power. She had the ability to survive in a world that had once seemed impossible. And maybe, just maybe, she could help others do the same. "I'm ready," she said, her voice strong. "Show me what I need to do." The man's eyes glinted with approval, and he stepped aside. "Follow me." Lyra followed him out of the building, her footsteps light but firm, as though the earth beneath her feet was no longer a challenge. The camp had changed in her eyes too. It was no longer a place of mystery and fear. It was a place of potential, a place where she could learn and grow, where she could understand the power that had been unlocked inside her. They walked toward a large open area outside the camp, where other people, similar to the man who had helped her, were gathered. They were standing in groups, talking quietly or practicing strange, fluid movements. They didn't seem to notice her at first, but when they did, their eyes lingered for a moment, studying her. It was clear they had all been through the same transformation, each person now more than human, each one carrying a new kind of power. "This is where you will begin," the man said, stopping in front of a group of them. "Here, you will train. You will learn how to control your abilities, how to use them. The world you knew is gone, Lyra. But in this new world, you have a chance to lead, to shape the future." Lyra looked at the others, their eyes full of purpose and strength. They had all made the same choice she had. And now, they were going to learn together, to become something more than they ever thought possible. She was no longer just a survivor. She was part of a new world, one where survival wasn't the goal, it was evolution. And for the first time in a long time, Lyra felt hope. Lyra stood with the group, her heart beating faster as she took in her surroundings. The area was vast, an open training ground with dirt beneath her feet and the sun blazing high overhead. The others were already in motion, practicing movements that seemed both graceful and powerful, their bodies moving with purpose. Some were stretching, some were sparring, while others stood quietly, their eyes closed, focusing on something Lyra couldn't see. The man who had helped her stood nearby, watching her closely. "This is your first test," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You'll need to learn control. You'll need to understand your new abilities, how to use them without losing yourself in the process." Lyra nodded, her palms sweating. The fear from earlier had faded, but a new feeling had replaced it, a mix of excitement and uncertainty. She had felt the change in her body, the power that now ran through her. but she had no idea how to control it. She had no idea what she was capable of. One of the others in the group, a tall woman with dark hair tied back in a ponytail, stepped forward. "I'm Kira," she said, her voice clear. "I'll be your sparring partner today. Don't worry, I won't hurt you. But you need to see what you can do." Lyra swallowed. Sparring. She didn't even know how to begin. But Kira's confident smile gave her a sense of reassurance. She took a deep breath and nodded, stepping forward. Kira motioned for Lyra to follow her into the center of the training area. "The first thing you need to understand is this. The energy inside you is not just for physical strength. It's for awareness. You can feel what's around you, what your opponent is thinking, feeling. Use that. Focus on the energy. Don't think of it as a fight. Think of it as a dance." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "A dance?" Kira smiled. "Exactly. You don't fight with force. You fight with control." Before Lyra could respond, Kira lunged, moving with a speed that took Lyra by surprise. Instinctively, Lyra stepped back, her body reacting faster than her mind could follow. She felt the air shift around her, as though her senses were heightened, but it was too late. Kira's arm brushed against her side, sending a jolt through her body. "That's the first lesson," Kira said, stepping back to give Lyra some space. "You can sense what's coming, but you have to learn to move with it, not against it." Lyra nodded, her mind racing. She hadn't expected it to be so fast, so real. The moment had passed so quickly, but Lyra felt the energy in the air like a pulse, like a current that ran through everything. It was overwhelming, but there was a strange clarity in it too. She felt it in her bones, this connection to the world around her. She could feel Kira's presence, could almost sense her next move before it happened. "Again," Kira said, her voice steady but encouraging. "Focus on the energy, not the action. Move with it." Lyra nodded, closing her eyes for a moment, letting the world around her go still. She felt her body relax, her breathing slowing. She could feel the pulse of the air, the heat of the sun, the slight shift in Kira's stance. Everything became sharp, clear. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. This time, when Kira lunged, Lyra didn't step back. Instead, she moved with the energy, shifting her weight to the side, her body fluid and quick. She felt Kira's movements before they fully registered, and with a swift twist, Lyra caught Kira's arm, redirecting the force of the strike. Kira grinned. "Good, now you're starting to get it." Lyra exhaled, a smile spreading across her face. It had been a small victory, but it felt real. She had done it. She had moved, not just with strength, but with awareness. It was a new kind of power, one that wasn't about force. It was about control, understanding, and connection. Kira stepped back, giving Lyra space to process. "You'll get better with time, but you've got the basics. It's all about using your energy, your new abilities, and learning to control them. Once you have that, you'll be able to face anything." The man who had brought Lyra here stepped forward, his eyes assessing. "She's right. You're learning fast. But this is only the beginning. You're not just training for self-defense. You're training to be something more. You need to learn how to lead, how to help others understand their power." Lyra nodded, still feeling the rush of the training. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about mastery, about understanding the power inside her and using it to shape the future. As the training session continued, Lyra pushed herself harder, moving, testing her limits. Every strike, every movement, brought more clarity. She felt the energy in everything, from the ground beneath her feet to the air above her head. The world had opened up in ways she hadn't imagined. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was becoming something else, something greater. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the camp, Lyra felt a sense of accomplishment wash over her. She had made it through her first test, and while she knew there was still much to learn, she also knew one thing for sure. She was ready for whatever came next. Lyra woke up early the next morning, the sound of distant chatter and soft footsteps echoing through the camp. The sky was still dark, but the first hints of sunlight were breaking over the horizon. She stretched, feeling the energy inside her, the power that had become part of her since she drank the strange liquid. Every movement, every breath, felt new. It was like she was living in a world she could finally understand. She had trained hard over the past few days. The lessons had been tough, but they had made her stronger. She had learned to control the energy within her, to move with it, to feel everything around her. Her senses had sharpened. She could hear the soft rustling of leaves in the distance, the pulse of every person in the camp, their thoughts and emotions almost tangible in the air. But despite all the progress, Lyra knew there was more. The man who had helped her hadn't told her everything. He spoke of a mission, a greater purpose, and she was ready to find out what it was. As she walked toward the main building, she saw the man standing outside, looking out over the camp. His eyes turned toward her as she approached, and he gave her a nod. "You're up early," he said with a slight smile. "Good. We have work to do." Lyra's heart quickened. What kind of work? The man turned to face her fully, his expression serious now. "We need to go on a mission. You've been training to understand your abilities, to control them. But now, it's time to test them in the field." Lyra frowned, confused. "A mission? Where are we going?" "There's a settlement," he said, his voice low. "A group of survivors. They've been struggling to stay alive in this desert, fighting over what little water is left. They need help, and we can give it to them." Lyra felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The thought of more people fighting over water was something she knew all too well. But could she really help them? Could she help them survive without the very thing they fought for? "Why don't you just give them water?" she asked, her voice hesitant. The man shook his head. "We can't give them water. That's not the solution. The world is running out of it. If we keep relying on old ways, we'll all die. We need to show them that there's another way, a way to survive without water." Lyra looked at him, her mind racing. She had seen the desperation in the eyes of people who had been without water for too long. She had felt that same desperation herself. But now, she was being asked to help them in a way she didn't fully understand. Could she really help them change their way of thinking? "How?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We'll show them what you've learned," the man said. "We'll teach them to harness the energy that flows through everything. You'll help them unlock the power they have inside themselves." Lyra took a deep breath. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about changing everything. She had seen it in her own transformation. Now, she would have to help others see it too. The man stepped closer, his eyes intense. "You'll need to be ready. This won't be easy. Not everyone will accept this change. They're used to the old ways, to fighting for water, fighting for resources. They may resist, but you have to be strong. For them." Lyra nodded, her resolve hardening. She had come so far already, but now the real test would begin. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about helping others, showing them that there was another way to live, a way that didn't depend on the old rules, the old struggles. "Let's go," the man said, his tone firm. "We leave at dawn." Lyra followed him to a small transport vehicle at the edge of the camp. As they climbed aboard, she glanced around at the others who had gathered, people who had gone through the same transformation she had. Their faces were serious, focused. They were ready for whatever lay ahead. The vehicle hummed to life and began its slow journey across the barren desert. The landscape was harsh, a world of sand and rock, with no sign of life for miles. But Lyra could feel something stirring in the air, a faint pulse that seemed to come from the earth itself. It was as if the very ground beneath her feet was alive with energy, waiting for something to awaken. After what felt like hours, they finally reached the settlement. It was a small cluster of makeshift buildings, surrounded by a high wall made of scrap metal and wood. A few people could be seen moving around the perimeter, keeping watch, while others worked inside the walls. There was a sense of tension in the air, a feeling of constant vigilance. The man stopped the vehicle and turned to Lyra. "This is it. We'll need to approach carefully. But remember, this is about showing them the future. You can't force them to change. You can only guide them." Lyra took a deep breath, steeling herself. This was her chance to make a difference, to change the way people thought about survival. She had been given a gift, a power that could change the world. And now, it was time to use it. She stepped out of the vehicle, her feet landing softly on the desert ground. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the settlement. It was time to show them what she had learned. Time to help them see that survival didn't have to mean fighting for the last drop of water. Lyra looked up at the walls of the settlement, her eyes filled with determination. She was ready. The air was thick with tension as Lyra stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. The settlement loomed in front of her, its tall walls casting long, dark shadows over the barren land. She could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on her. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about changing everything, changing the way these people saw the world, changing how they lived. The man who had trained her stood beside her, his eyes focused on the settlement ahead. He said nothing, but his presence was a steady reminder of what she had become and what she was about to do. "We approach carefully," he finally said, his voice low. "These people are desperate. They've been fighting for water for too long. They won't trust easily." Lyra nodded. She understood. The world had made them this way. Desperation had driven them to fight, to cling to the old ways, to believe that survival could only come from hoarding resources. But she had learned there was another way. She had learned to survive without water. She had learned to harness the energy that flowed through everything. She turned toward the settlement's gates, her eyes scanning the guards at the top of the walls. They watched her, their faces hidden beneath the shadows, but she could feel their eyes on her, measuring her every move. They were waiting for a reason to reject her, to send her away. But she wasn't here to fight. She was here to show them the truth. As they approached the gates, one of the guards stepped forward, his hand resting on the weapon at his side. "What do you want?" he called out, his voice sharp and suspicious. The man with Lyra stepped forward, holding his hands up in a peaceful gesture. "We've come to offer help," he said. "We know about your struggles. We can teach you how to survive without water, without fighting for it." The guard narrowed his eyes. "What kind of help? We don't need charity. We're not here to give you water," the man replied calmly. "We're here to show you a new way, a way that doesn't rely on the old systems, a way to survive, to thrive, without fighting for the last drop." The guard's grip on his weapon tightened, but he didn't draw it. "And why should we believe you?" The man turned to Lyra, silently giving her the cue. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, her mind focused on the energy she could feel flowing all around her. The ground beneath her feet, the air in her lungs, the very heartbeat of the world. It was all alive with energy. She could sense the pulse of the land, the rhythm of the people, the fear and hope that mingled in the air. "I was like you," Lyra said, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "I was desperate. I thought I could only survive if I fought for water, if I held on to the old ways. But I was wrong. There's another way. We don't need to fight for resources. We can tap into the energy around us, inside of us, and learn to live without relying on the old systems." The guard hesitated, his eyes flicking between her and the man beside her. He clearly didn't know whether to trust her. Lyra could feel the tension building, the doubt swirling in the air like a storm waiting to break. "You think you can change us?" the guard asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "You think you can make us believe that survival doesn't depend on water?" Lyra nodded, her gaze unwavering. "Yes, I can show you. But you have to be willing to see beyond the way things have always been. You have to be willing to open your mind to something new." The guard still seemed uncertain, but something in Lyra's voice, Something in the quiet confidence of her words seemed to shift in the air. He looked past her for a moment, glancing back at the settlement behind him. Lyra could feel his doubt, his fear, but also something else. A flicker of curiosity, a hint of hope. After what felt like an eternity, the guard nodded slowly. "Fine," he said. "We'll listen. But if you're lying, if this is some kind of trap, don't expect us to show mercy." Lyra gave a small nod in return, relieved but not surprised. She had known this wouldn't be easy, but she was ready. She stepped forward, signaling for the others to follow her into the settlement. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, but there was a sense of quiet anticipation in the air. People moved about in the narrow streets, eyes darting toward the newcomers, whispering to one another. Lyra could feel their gaze on her, heavy with suspicion, but she didn't falter. She had a mission now, and she was determined to see it through. The man with her led her to the center of the settlement, where a small group of leaders had gathered. Their faces were weathered and hard, but their eyes betrayed a mixture of curiosity and doubt. They were desperate. They were willing to listen, but only because they had no other choice. Lyra faced them, her body steady, her mind clear. "You've been fighting for water," she began, her voice loud enough for all to hear. "But there's another way, a way to survive without it." She could see the skepticism in their eyes, hear the low murmur of disbelief in the crowd. But she wasn't here to convince them all at once. She was here to plant the seed. And with that first step, she knew the rest would follow. As she spoke, she felt the energy in the air shift, the power of the land, the people, and her own transformation merging. She could feel them, each person, starting to listen, starting to wonder if the world could be different. The first step had been taken, and in the silence that followed her words, Lyra knew she had begun the change.